3, 2, 1.
New York, NY. LaunchPod starts now.
Welcome to the New York LaunchPod, a podcast on new startups, businesses, and openings in the New York City area. I'm Hal Coopersmith, and in this episode, we are speaking to Susannah Vila, the founder of Flip. Flip is a marketplace for flexible housing that helps people sublet their apartments and subtenants find housing for less than a year. This is a major pain point for a whole lot of people, and Susannah thinks that she has the perfect solution in Flip. In the episode, we cover a whole lot of ground, including how people use the platform and even why more flexible housing situations like these are more in demand. So without any further ado, let's go to the episode. Stepping onto LaunchPod, we have Susannah Vila, the founder of Flip. Thanks for stepping onto LaunchPod, Susannah.
Thank you for having me.
So you are the founder of Flip, and you want to help people get out of their leases. Is that correct?
Or sublet. The way we think about it is it's really we want to help people to live more flexibly, so access housing for whatever period of time they need it for.
And how would you describe Flip?
Well, it's a marketplace for flexible housing. So on the one side, we help people to sublet or get out of their lease, and then we help people to find a sublet or a flexible rental. And we take care of the entire process, from making sure it's legal to making sure both sides are protected from unsafe transactions. We really make it so you have, press a button or two and you access space for whatever time you need it for, or you press another couple of buttons and you can get out of space that you don't want to be liable to anymore.
And it's only for residential leases.
Exactly, yeah. We're just focused on housing at the moment.
So I have a lease for an apartment in New York, and I just got a job offer out of town. I need to sublease. I need to get out of my lease. I go to you, and what do I do?
So the number one reason actually that people use us is related to what's going on in their professional lives. An interesting thing that's happening in the world, as a side note, is that more and more people are working flexibly, right? So it makes sense that they would want to access housing flexibly. It might be that they have a gig in LA for 3 months, but they live in New York, or they might have gotten their dream job in LA and they know, and I hate New York, they never want to be back in New York again, right? So in either of those two scenarios, what they'll do is, it's really simple, actually. You just post the information about the space that you want somebody else to pay for, and you choose whichever person you want to live there. And you can see how qualified they are as a renter. In other words, how happy would even the most strict landlord be with them living in the unit. You can see their credit score, their income patterns, all sorts of bells and whistles. And they put down money, first month's rent, right, and a security deposit if you want it. And then we kind of manage the whole thing for you, so you don't have to worry about it anymore.
And how are you able to find out all this information about a prospective subtenant?
So people make profiles, right? So on any digital platform, everybody has a profile. It's just that the profile on Flip can serve as a rental application. It's that detailed. And technology exists now in a way that it's easier to access than maybe 10 years ago, where you really can, with a few button presses, connect your bank account and show that you make $100,000 a year and that you pay all your rent on time. Connect your credit score and show that you've had your background checked and you've got a good credit score. So that's what a profile on Flip means. It's a kind of a dynamic, constantly updating rental application.
So if I'm a prospective subtenant, I create a profile. I have to link my bank account, link my credit score, everything else like that?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to initially, but once you see a room or an apartment that you want, you're going to be prompted to by the platform itself and probably by the person who's thinking about bringing you in there.
And how many apartments do you have on the site?
We've got about 2,000 available listings right now. Those are both rooms and entire apartments. And we're active in LA, San Francisco, and New York.
And what are the challenges in being in these different cities?
It's surprisingly similar, the three different cities. And the reason we went into these cities is because we knew that this is where a lot of people in our demographic are living, right? This is where rent is a big deal for people. You're not going to leave a apartment or a room for 3 months and just not worry about the rent because it's very expensive. Our users, the people who I think our product resonates with, are moving between these cities, right? So a lot of people move between San Francisco, New York, and LA. So we're able to build up that density and that kind of like the good stuff you want in a marketplace in those three cities.
And how are you able to get the users onto the site? I have to imagine that that's the biggest thing for sites like these. It's like you have to get people using the platform. It could be well designed, but it's all about getting those users.
Yeah, it was very hard at first. What we have seen happen in the last I want to say 6 to 9 months, is this amazing uptick in growth from word of mouth. People really just searching flip, what is flip? How do I flip a lease? And then that being kind of complemented by us starting to rank for search terms. So SEO started to work for us. But initially what we did was we said, okay, well, where are people now that might have this problem or might be interested in our product? And we kind of manually reached out to them on the platforms that they were on already. So Facebook would be a good example, and said, come join us. You know, you can stay on Facebook, obviously, but we've got a great set of tools that might be useful for what you're doing. And then they would do that. And then they would tell their friends, right? So that's how we kind of grew initially.
When I'm listing an apartment, I need to take photos of it. What do I need to do when I'm listing an apartment?
What we try and do is put a lot of the tools that have previously been more in the hands of real estate professionals into the hands of renters, so they can do all this themselves. So it's our job to create something that makes it very, very easy for you to make your apartment look extremely enticing, right? Of course, there are things that are hard, that it's harder for us to do for you. We don't go take pictures for our users right now. Most of them are taking photos themselves on their iPhones. As far as other stuff they have to add, it's just basic details. You know, when's the lease end? How long are you gone for? What's the rent? Why are you leaving? Is just something that a lot of people add. We want them to add that because it creates a layer of like another layer of information and trust really on the marketplace.
Right. Like I'm not leaving because my neighbor's really loud or smokes a lot.
Well, that's actually, as I see it, a huge benefit of building a peer-to-peer marketplace for rentals, that ultimately we have all this information that comes from the peer, the consumer, that you would never get by interacting with a professional. Such as the neighbors are really loud. The neighbors like to party a lot. There's really weird light in the afternoon. Stuff that you'd only hear from an outgoing renter.
But if I'm an outgoing renter, am I really willing to share the negative parts about my apartment?
Some are, some aren't, right? I mean, of course, you can imagine why you wouldn't be. But when it's not your job you don't have like a commission on the hook, you're more likely to.
So what are some of the items that will make an apartment more attractive?
I mean, the biggest one is probably not a shocker. It's just value, right? So if something gets listed on Flip and it is a reasonable rent price and it looks like an enticing place to live, we will see it will flip within a couple of days. They'll get a ton of messages. They'll have the pick of the litter. They'll choose whoever looks to be the best renter, whoever wants to maybe put down the biggest initial deposit, and that person will have a great experience. On the other hand, you have a lot of, and this is just the nature of any market, you have a lot of units that are going to stay vacant or available for a longer period of time for a variety of different reasons, but largely because the price doesn't work for most people. And what we actually built as a way to address that is something called bounties, which is a additional amount of money that somebody can put on their listing to incentivize not just folks who might want to come and live there to fill it, but also anybody on the internet who might have a friend or a friend of a friend who wants to live in a unit in Midtown with a pool on the roof. So if they find you somebody to live there, they'll earn whatever that bounty is. And since day one, we've always been shocked by the amount of money that people are willing to pay in bounties just to fill a space.
And who are these people who are taking over leases? Because you sign a residential lease, it's 1 or 2 years. Let's say it's 1 year. You leave 5 months through. It's 7 months in a space that may not be furnished, and then they don't know what the rent's going to be after the term of the lease.
The thing to keep in mind, actually, and the way we think about it, is that it's a lot easier to gain access to a sublet than it is to gain access to a traditional lease. And the result of that is that we have a lot of people for whom it's hard to get on a traditional lease who are coming to us and saying, I'm going to use Flip. Even if I'm going to be in New York for the next 2 years, I just want to get on a Flip lease because it's a better experience for me, right? A lot of our users are around that age range. Maybe they're not making a lot of money yet. It's harder for them to get approved for leases. And they don't know where they're going to be in 6 months. Being in your 20s is a time where you just, there's a lot of unknowns. Relationships, jobs, school, things happen in your life over the course of a year that you never would have been able to predict. So people want that flexibility, right? So the way I think about it is there's 3 main reasons why people come to Flip to find a place to live. One is that, like I said, it's easier to get on a Flip lease. 2 is just they want that flexibility. They want to be able to leave whenever they need to. And 3 is they know they're going to be in New York for 3 months and only 3 months, or 5 months and only 5 months, and they want a 5-month lease.
And how are landlords reacting to this? Because I have to imagine that some will just not be happy about it.
The way I think about it is Flip is a fast-growing source of pre-qualified leads for a landlord, right? So you are, in the old way of doing things, having trouble, let's say, filling a space to varying degrees, but it's always kind of annoying, filling a unit and making sure that somebody's in there and is qualified and is paying the rent. What we're doing is we're bringing a digital platform to the fore, where there's really always a certain amount of people who are already qualified, right, digitally, dynamically, who want to live in X unit and pay whatever their rent is. So it takes a lot of the pain, actually, out of owning property. So in the past year, what we've seen is a lot of landlords, not the bigger ones, but the smaller ones, coming and joining us and saying, well, this platform looks like a great way for me to fill my units. It might be marketed towards renters who want to sublet, but I'm going to use it too. And they're using it, and they're posting their units on Flip. And the ones, obviously, that are more flexible go faster because we're a marketplace for flexible rentals. And they might want to rent something out for 5 months or 6 months because they can earn a slight premium, or just as a way to kind of manage their inventory and make sure that a unit comes on the market at the right time of the year.
And what about some of the larger landlords where people have signed leases? What are their reactions?
So it's interesting for the larger landlords. They have so many more units that they see this problem on a daily basis, right? They have leasing teams of 5, 10, 15 people. And those leasing teams very, very, very frequently get the tenants in those buildings coming to them saying, I need to get out of my lease, or I need to sublet. Can I do this? How do I do it legally? And they want to be able to say, not my problem, go use Flip. And so in those buildings, we have a lot of the leasing agents, leasing specialists sending the residents to us. And again, it works out well for both sides.
And so when people are subleasing a unit, their apartment, let's say they go to California or San Francisco from New York.
Yeah.
And they lease out a unit to their subtenant. They're still responsible for the apartment. Let's say the subtenant parties, or, they may have a good credit score, but they get into trouble, no fault of their own, or don't leave the apartment in the right condition. How does Flip play a role in that dynamic, or is it just passed off to that person?
So this is something that's been happening in the world outside of us, with or without us. I call it a shadow market. It's people who are renting in a peer-to-peer way, informally, because they want or need to rent that way because of the scenario you just described and many, many more. And when they're renting informally in the shadow market, they're all essentially liable, right? You sublet out your room to somebody else. They say they're going to pay, but technically you're liable, or maybe the person who's the primary leaseholder is liable, and neither of you are liable. But it's a risky scenario either way. And of course, that's risky for the owner as well, because they have, at a certain point, no idea who's living in their buildings and who's going to be paying the rent. So what we're doing is we're really taking that market out of the shadows and bringing a lot of trust into it. So because everybody on the platform is qualified by us, because all the payments are taken care of by us, because we hold rent payments and security deposits in escrow and make sure they're paid out at the correct time when both parties release them, the experience of renting on both the supply side and the demand side becomes much, much, much more, I guess a good word for it would be just delightful.
And so people will pay the rent through your platform to the sublandlord?
Exactly, yeah.
And I know this in New York. I'm a real estate lawyer. Everyone has a right to sublease their apartment.
Not a lot of people know that.
Well, it depends on the building, which I want to get into, if it's a rental building. But that you have a right within 30 days that the landlord has to give acceptance or denial. What happens if the landlord doesn't respond? Have you ever encountered that situation in New York?
No, we haven't. And that's because although some landlords are terrible at responding, in the case of our company and our users for the last 2 years, almost all of the time it works for people, right? They get the application from us, they ask for approval, it all goes through. But we always tell people, and we make a point of trying to let our users and our potential users know that if you go through the process correctly and the steps that we lay out for you, even if your landlord ignores you, or if they say you can't do it and the person who you're bringing in is in fact qualified, you can still go ahead and do it. That's just a part of our job, as I see it, to build awareness about what tenants' rights are.
And what if a landlord says no?
The landlord says no, then you have this gray area where it's like, are they reasonable, or is it a reasonable or is it an unreasonable refusal? It becomes like a common sense thing. Why wouldn't the landlord bring somebody in who can clearly pay their rent?
There's a whole lot going on with Airbnb and short-term rentals in the city all over the place. Do you see any regulatory challenges for what you're doing?
No, and in fact, I've had the opportunity to meet with a lot of folks who have taken issue with the impacts of Airbnb short-term rentals on affordable housing in cities. And what I always do is just kind of prop up Flip and say, listen, we're doing everything above board. We care first and foremost about rental housing being affordable and easy to access and available and filled with renters so that everyone's happy. And nothing that we do is in any way illegal, right? All of our listings are 30-day plus.
How do you make money?
So we're a transactional marketplace. So when somebody books a listing, we take a fee.
Would you consider yourself a broker?
We are technically a brokerage because we are technically taking a commission based on a lease getting signed.
So you had to register as a brokerage?
Indeed.
How was that?
In New York, it wasn't that hard. We're working on doing it for California, and it's a bit harder. And we will have challenges ahead of us as we expand to other parts of the world and parts of the country. Not crazy insurmountable challenges, but the way I look at it is some of my favorite companies go to the trouble of dealing with regulatory challenges and paperwork requirements for their users so the users don't have to, right? And that's part of what we're doing for people.
I want to read this quote to you from the New York Times. You were in the New York Times in December 2015 about the marketplace that you're in. It's a quote from Gary Malin, the president of City Habitats, about your company and companies like yours. It says, I appreciate the ingenuity, but I haven't seen many of these companies take hold because the system as it is now works. How do you respond?
My company and my product works within the system as it works now in every way, right? So some of our most frequent users are in fact brokers. If you create a platform with lots and lots of renters who are qualified, who want to pay for housing, then you will create something valuable for anybody who's involved in the real estate ecosystem. Brokers, owners, managers, and other renters. So
how are brokers working from your platform? Will they reach out to users directly?
They're listing, actually. They're listing and they are getting leads and accepting bookings on the platform.
Do the people on your platform pay the 15% rental commission?
No, it's important to us that if a broker wants to charge that, they just be transparent about it. For the most part, listings on Flip don't have any extra fees on them. We take a fee that's paid to the demand side, so the renter coming in, but it's orders of magnitude smaller than any real estate brokerage fee, right? And we don't charge the person listing at all.
How are you different than your competitors?
We'd have to say which competitors, but specifically the things that separate.
Well, you can specify which competitors you want to differentiate yourself from.
How are we different from our competitors? What I care about is what does the Flip user think about using before they use us, right? Or as they're using us. So in New York or in LA or in San Francisco, when somebody wants to find a rental, they're going to use Zillow and Craigslist. In New York, it's StreetEasy. And the main difference between Flip and those listing portals is that on Flip, getting access to a unit of housing is so much easier because you can do it in the same way that you book a vacation rental on Airbnb or book a rental car. You're already qualified, you have a message, and you press a booking button, and then you have a lease, right? That's something that is not the case on Zillow or any listing portal. These are media websites where vacancy goes up and there's this whole layer of people and process between the vacancy going up on one of their websites and a renter getting access to the housing. So that's how we're different for the renter. Then there's the supply side. How are we different for the person who's listing a unit of space that they want to fill? I think the reason that we've been able to grow and we will continue growing is that we are really addressing what is an unmet need. There is no company out there that's saying, listen, Susannah, you want to go live in LA for 4 months. there's a lot of hassle associated with making sure you're not paying rent in two places at one time. I'm going to take that hassle out of your life in every way. There is no other company doing that. And that's why we've grown. That's why we're getting word of mouth, right?
That's why you're here.
That's why we're here. And so with that in mind, all I care about is making sure that we continue to provide the best product possible to the supply side and get more renters joining us and grow that virtuous circle kind of as much as we can.
And what is the market like for people for flexible leases? Because you mentioned that it's 20-somethings. Is that really your main target? Who are they? What are they really doing?
I think about myself when I graduated from college, or the people who are using us now who are largely coming to cities after finishing school. And what I want our platform to do is really hold their hand from the perspective of finding and experiencing housing in cities from the time they're 22 until they buy a house and get a mortgage when they're 30 or 35 or 40. It doesn't matter how flexible it is. What matters is that it's a better, more convenient, and easier, and more affordable solution for finding housing.
And what about finding a roommate? Like, let's say you have that 3-bedroom apartment in the East Village and one roommate goes out, someone comes in. A lot of times people list the apartment on Craigslist, or maybe they did in years past, and that's, probably hit or miss for Craigslist. But how are you bringing in people for individual rooms?
We never set out to create any kind of roommate matching product or really even to address that problem at all. But what we did end up doing, or we did do, is we built a series of tools that it turns out are actually very useful and sought after by people who are looking to fill rooms, right? If you're looking to fill a room, you want to make sure the payments are secure. You don't want to have to worry about it. You want to make sure that the person who's living in your apartment with you in one of the rooms is qualified. You want to make sure that they are approved by the landlord, so you're not worried about that. You want to make sure that you have a good legal agreement in place, right? That somebody else, a third party that knows about this, built for you, and you don't have to worry about. And that's why we've started to get so many people renting out rooms with us. People don't come to Flip, I don't think, because they want to find the roommate that gets them or that they're going to have the most fun with. They just want it to be a better, more convenient solution for filling a room.
And what happens if someone defaults on their sublease? Have you ever encountered that situation where they don't pay the rent?
Yeah, it's a funny time to be asking me that, because what we're working on right now is building out a series of guarantees and insurance products for our users to make sure that they don't have to worry about that either. So, come to me in 6 months and I'll have a better answer. But what I can say is that a really core part of our mission is to bring a level of trust into the subleasing marketplace, that has not existed to date. And part of that means helping to make sure people will pay the rent when they say they'll pay the rent.
Is this market a growing market, or is it basically a fixed set of people who will be looking for flexible leases? Because I just read that now millennials are purchasing more apartments. In the first quarter of 2017, there was a report that said that there were 854,000 new owner households and 365,000 new renter households.
What's a simultaneous trend that's happening is that the amount of people who are renting in this country, and I think globally, is growing at a crazy clip, right? So Trulia, Zillow also do this research, and I think it's over $500 billion is spent now in rent in the U.S., and just a few years ago, it was 10% less. That's insane. The amount of people that are renting is just skyrocketing, even if more people are owning houses. So the way I think about it is it's really not about if you want a flexible rental. It's the fact that everybody in their 20s is renting housing, right? And more of them are sharing housing with each other because they're living in cities to a greater degree than ever before also. That's not going to change. And they're going to need to share housing because it's the best way to find affordable housing. So it's very much a growing market. And as we make it easier and more convenient for people to rent, right? Full stop, just rent. But then also rent flexibly, sublet, get out of a lease, more and more people will be doing that.
I just want to go back to that assumption where it's a growing marketplace, that people want to be in cities. Certainly younger people want to be in cities. We've found that migration to cities as cities have gone safer. We're the New York launchpad, so everyone should be living in New York. But certainly people moved to the suburbs before. And is it just part of, let's say, a bubble of people who are in a certain stage of life who are helping to fuel cities, and then eventually they'll move out to the suburbs, or if location doesn't matter as much as it once did, may move away from cities.
Of course, on a micro level, there are people who want to move to the suburbs and have kids still, and there always will be. But on a macro level, more people are living in cities.
Where do you see Flip in the overall scheme of real estate? Where do you see this going?
Real estate is one of the few industries that has not yet been really upended by a digital platform. So in other industries, we see platforms making it much, much easier for supply to connect with demand, for buyers to connect with sellers. Commerce is an obvious one. In work, you see something like Upwork, making it much, much easier, much, much more easy for people to, with work, to find people who want to work. In real estate, as well as in healthcare, fintech, this just doesn't exist yet, right? There is no transactional marketplace that directly connects supply with demand, people who own property with people who want to lease property. The benefits of a digital platform for an industry are obvious. When supply is directly connected with demand, it's always filled. When a platform can be the gatekeeper, you don't need to spend money on gatekeepers. It will have huge repercussions for the industry. What we think is that we're on our way towards building that, right? And we're not the only company that wants to build that, but we are going about it in what I think is a different way, which is really focusing on the peer-to-peer market initially.
I want to read you another quote from the New York Times article that you were in, from Joe Charrett, the chief executive officer of Naked Apartments. He said, "Since we've been around, we've seen the graveyard of companies trying to build for the New York City renter. How are you going to avoid the graveyard?"
I mean, I'll go back to what I always say about what it is that we're doing, which is that we are solving a painful problem for people. And if you build a company where people are so happy to have found you because they were in so much pain before that they tell their friends and their family about it, you're going to build a good company. So, I can't or speak to the graveyard, what's in the graveyard, but my assumption is if they had been similarly solving a problem for renters, for consumers, then they wouldn't have died.
And what's been the advantage for you of being in New York?
Well, there's two ways to think about it. There's from the perspective of a startup, what's the ecosystem in New York like? And I've always liked that it's different from San Francisco, where most startups are, in that it's smaller and you know exactly who's relevant to you and who you need to be getting to know. And that has its downsides and its upsides. We've been able to benefit from a lot of the upsides. This was perhaps a weird market in New York City for us to start our company in, because there are so many details about renting property in New York that do not exist anywhere. What some people say is that the residential rental market in New York is a crazy beast unlike any other. And while it's worth a lot of money, it's very valuable, it's extremely hard to dig into. And with that in mind, maybe we shouldn't have started in New York. But at the same time, the other side of the coin is that because renting is so hard here, that allowed us to, I think, grow even more, because people are looking for a solution where it's better, right? So if we can build something that works for all those intricacies, within all those intricacies, the exclusives that brokers have, all these complicated arrangements, and also works for the renter, then it's a win-win.
So you have that New York grit, and then you can go to other markets, and it's so much easier.
Yeah, after New York, every other market is a walk in the park.
What's easier about the other markets?
Because I think real estate is so valuable here, there are a lot of layers of people and processes and rules related to how a unit of space becomes rented or doesn't become rented. In other markets, really, it's just more simple, right? There's a landlord, and he or she wants to rent out his or her unit. A renter comes, and they sign a lease. It's easier already, and will be even easier for us to bring a digital platform into that transaction.
That is a great point to wrap things up on. How do people find out more about you and Flip?
They should come check out our website. Google Flip, we're the first thing to come up. So that's definitely the easiest way to find us.
And the website? It's
flip.lease. But I always recommend people just Google us.
Google Flip or go to flip.lease. I love your company. It's a wonderful idea. I think it's a great way for people to find their next subtenants. They're in a pinch. They just got their notice. They moved to a different place, so they want to get into a temporary place. Thank you for stepping onto the New York Launch Pod and sharing your time with us. And if you want to learn more about the New York Launch Pod, you can visit nylaunchpod.com for transcripts of the episodes, including this one. And you can follow us on social media at nylaunchpod. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes. It does help people discover the episode, and it is greatly appreciated.